All right. So talking about the ego and talking about like how you are your own brand expressing itself in the world, I got to thinking about something specific. I think all the way back to like I think I don't know if it's Aristotle or Socrates, one of these two, but one of them said something very important, which is man is either a god or a beast, or a god or a beast. Here we go. We'll find out who said it. And I wondered when he said it what he meant by that, when he meant what he meant by that. But then I remembered I actually was reading a manga once. It's called Tough. Very good manga. I really think that we should actually make an anime of that. Simply because, well, there are a couple of animes that are like super like masculine and stuff like this. But this manga is literally about a guy that was a journalist, and what he did was he'd go and he'd interview like martial artists around the world, masters of the martial arts around the world. And with every interview, he creates a character and he finds out what their techniques are and he asks them enough questions and creates a character based on them. And ultimately, he created this martial arts where there's manga where just people kind of like evolved, where this one guy kind of like evolved fighting all these guys. And it's very technical, it's very beautiful, and I would recommend it to everyone, 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 everyone. But an uncle in that manga would say one thing, and that thing is what triggered me to research and then eventually figure out that it's either, one second, it's Aristotle. Man is by nature a social animal. An individual, one second, an individual who is unsocial, fuck off. An individual who is unsocial naturally and not accidentally is either beneath our notice or more than human. Society is something that precedes the individual. Anyone who either cannot lead the common life or is so self sufficient as not to need to, and therefore does not partake of society, is either a beast or a god. And the way he describes it is ultimately like whatever society is a creation that man did. And even though we are social animals, but society itself is unnatural. So anyone who decides to not partake of this society is either primitively a beast or very much so a god, like beyond what exists in the real world or what society is able to see. Super fucking beautiful quote. I really think that digs deep into the nature of man and what we're capable of doing. I also think it goes both ways because, like, man in general, if he uses his mind, he goes up he elevates. And if he doesn't use his mind, he becomes primitive because, like, we're either thinking with our head or we're thinking with our, like, pleasures. And our pleasures are kind of like the primitive aspects of our existence. But the mental and the conscious are more like the godly existence that we have. But in this actual, but in this manga that I talked about, the guy that actually travels the world and the guy who wrote the manga travels the world and interviews martial artists all the way Brazil. It's just beautiful, man. That guy like literally did what he wanted out of his life. What an actual like, what a goal to reach. Any goal, anyone who sets up to do anything, fucking beautiful. Just do it. The world loves shit like this. Why? Because ultimately, when I read that manga, I'm living the way the guy lived just by reading it. Imagine this experience. And that's why books are amazing. That's why movies give us that feeling, but they don't give us that experience. They just give us that feeling. They trigger us, but they don't allow us to observe it. They don't allow us to engage with it properly. But so in the manga, one guy, the uncle, looks at the guy and he goes, man is a being between seer and beast, which means he could either be a god or he could either be like an animal, right? I think they use the word demon, but the idea behind it is we get to choose which way we go. And that's where our conscious intention kind of like steps in, because we get to choose what kind of being we want to be on this earth. We want to choose. And I feel strongly that within society, we rarely get to actually make those decisions properly. As long as we're in society, we're always pulled and distracted and moved by different kinds of things. But for man to be a being between God and the beast, ultimately, We are very much creators, and our creation is it is limitless. It is ridiculous how limitless it is. It is fascinating how unimportant it is, and how our existence is fleeting. Yet within this existence, we manage to do a whole lot. Like the whole of humanity documented, I think, is not over 100 or 150,000 years. But it's funny because it's always, anytime you look at it, you realize that when man existed, for a couple of thousand years, he was like very much barren and useless. And then suddenly, pop, he's like super technological and all that stuff. And why? It's because we kind of create concepts in our mind and we apply them to the real world and we find a way to apply them. And it seems like this world was created specifically for us to go in that route. It was created specifically for us to involve ourselves and engage with these kinds of things. And the seer in us, the all-seeing, the wise one in us, the conscious, the global consciousness, that the connection we might have to this planet, because this planet is life. We are not we are not life on this planet. We are the life of this planet. We are a part of the life on this planet because other planets around us don't really like give us that like sense of existence, which is weird because like again like what the fuck are we? But since we get to be creative and we get to be like the well, Jordan Peterson says it perfectly. Dr. Jordan Peterson says it perfectly. He says, "You are the center of your own universe because literally your reality is all this reality is your creation." So ultimately, what we project to the outside world is our own choice, is our own decision. So we could project our animal instincts, or we can project a higher consciousness. We can project ourselves to be like intelligent, understanding, or we can project ourselves to be completely like primitive and dumbfounded. And it's funny because this has nothing to do with social status, because the wisest of them all have never been people that are specifically like ingrained in what social statuses are. They're literally people that got to look at life differently and wanted to like enjoy it in a certain kind of way instead of the norm. And when I say the norm, I say the media, marketing, and all the stuff that are always like surrounding us and influencing our mind and our brain and everything like this. So for me, as I think about it, I process the whole, do we really elevate when we allow ourselves to absorb the world and accept that we are a part of it, that we actually have a responsibility towards it? And by doing that, effectively, what we're doing is we're acknowledging that everything we do, also the world gets to see. And then our representation in this world, which goes back to the ego that I was discussing to the past 6 or 7 like videos have been about the ego. But now I'm talking from the branding perspective because you are doing what you want to do and it's represented in the ego, but the representation for the outside world is kind of like a brand, a label, a sense of relation that people will have towards you. And they will relate to something when it comes to you. The world will relate to something when it comes to you. But the closer you are to, I guess, a seer in the Aristotle's concept of how you elevate as a human being, or you kind of like go down to the primitive side. And the reason I say down is because I'm pointing to the chakras, because we all start at the solar plexus. We go up towards the crown chakra, which is, and I'm not being spiritual, I'm just saying that's how they explain it normally. And it makes sense because the heart pumps up and down. And the more down you go, the more primitive you are. The more up you go, the more this and the voice and the eyes and the mind, right? Right? So, anyways, 6 videos I'm talking about the ego, but right now it's the brand. Why? Because like we are a representation of ourselves, and we either choose to represent ourselves a certain kind of way, or we allow ourselves to be represented any way we're interacting. So the more we are trying to be conscious, the more we are actively trying to represent ourselves and brand and represent our brand to the world in a certain way. And the more we are trying, the less we are trying to be conscious, we automatically start becoming more primitive because that's the basics of survival, right? Like, the more primitive you are, the more into survival mode you are. And the more conscious you are, the less into survival mode you are, but the more actually like you're looking at life in a different way, I don't know, in a wholesome way, I would say, in a fun way. I'm not sure. But ultimately, the pressures and stress that nature throws at you are not really like going to be affecting you. And as us, if we are to kind of like be true to our brand, effectively, we have to be more of seers and we have to level up, elevate our conscious approach towards ourselves. Because the more I use my consciousness in order to like approach the world, the more I realize that I am the representation of what this world has to offer. And the more I realize that I am the person that has to show what I want this world to be about. And it could only be reflected by the brand that they can see out of it. Like they labeled all these parts through science and studies and business as a brand. And basically, every one of us is responsible for their own actions and everyone's actions. But the way you could be responsible for everyone's actions is to show everyone what kind of person you are, and to kind of like slowly allow people to look at you instead of allowing them to kind of like just be random. And I could end this with uh, it's the shepherd basically guides the sheep. The sheep are the beasts of the land, and the shepherd is the conscious one. So in your activity, you have to build yourself in a way where people would want to follow you or look at you or listen to you or understand you or want to be around you. And if you don't do that, what kind of change do you think you'd be impacting the world with? And ultimately, that's your duty to get to do that. You kind of have to like establish something that people can relate to, and that's where your brand kicks in, and that's where building your ego supports your brand. That's it. Man is a being. It's either a seer, it's either a beast or a god. How awesome is that? History, yeah.